What's good, y'all? Welcome back to the Playmaker's Corner podcast. This is episode 498, and at the time I'm recording this intro, it is February 25th, 2026 here, and I got your second episode for this week where we are going to recognize all the great players from week 2 of the 2026 women's college flag football season. Remember, in case you don't know or just forgot, we basically do our weeks like this. We go Monday to Sunday here. So week 2 for us was every game from February 16th to February 22nd here. And so by the time this episode comes out, I know some games have already happened to start week 3, but that'll be coming out on the previous week where we'll talk about those games and then how those affect stuff like our rankings, Playmaker of the Week, fantasy point leaders, and other great stuff like that. But that's all what we got for this episode. We got Playmaker of the Week. We're going to talk about the lead fantasy point leaders. We're going to talk about our PMC Fantasy League and an update to that here. We're going to talk about our week 2 college rankings. A lot of ups and downs. I think every single team except for 6 or 5 in our top 25 currently, or at least in this updated top 25, moved up or down in some way. Some teams moving up and down for different reasons. And so we're going to talk about that, and then that'll basically wrap up this episode. So without further ado, let's just go ahead and hop right into it. Alrighty, now let's go ahead and talk about Playmaker of the Week. This recognition goes out to the best playmaker from week 2, somebody whose performance was impactful and huge for their team's success here. Now, there's a lot of players who put up some stats. Back in week 1, if you remember, it was actually the player who had the most stats, who had the biggest amounts of numbers out of anybody in that week, in Shania Spencer. This week, I mean, it didn't disappoint. You had plenty of players who put up some big stats, and I gotta shout him out here. Amaya Pablo of Lindsey Wilson. First off, 2-0 in program history, and it's largely because of her success against D2 Chowan, 164 yards and 7 touchdowns, against D3 Virginia Wesleyan, and by the way, they're all first-year programs over there. 223 yards, 6 touchdowns, 46 rushing yards, and 3 rushing touchdowns. Absolutely stuffed the stat sheet, and also, most importantly, got the biggest wins in, well, obviously in program history, but big wins to start your program out of. Not to mention a record, I believe, in the biggest margin of victory in a women's college flag football game. At least I believe so. I couldn't find anything else that disputed that. In addition, you have another quarterback in Kennedy Young who was 2-1 on the week here. Could have been 3-0, and that may have made the difference here, but lost a close one to Campbellsville. In those games was lights out as well. 4 touchdowns, 312 yards, 28 rushing yards against Campbellsville. Against LaGrange, they beat them as well. 167 yards, 2 touchdowns, 15 yards, 1 rushing touchdown. Against Cumberland, a big blowout win against them. 190 yards and 3 touchdowns for Kennedy Young of Huntington College. Definitely in consideration here. In addition, I want to talk about Lindsey Wilson actually a little bit more, and I should have mentioned them here. You have both Jade Maziata and Cadence Wormers, who put up multiple touchdowns, including Wormers with 6 touchdowns against Chowan. Maziata also did her thing with 4 touchdowns against Virginia Wesleyan. Both players were dealing and were playing at a high level. We have the other freshman here, Ava Wallace of Kaiser, who had a great debut week here against Lisa McRae, 6 touchdowns against Life, another 5 touchdowns there as she turns it up. And then you obviously have Warner and what they had going on. Catherine Hutchinson, 331 yards, 9 passing touchdowns, multiple touchdowns to all her receivers as well. You have Shahira Wada of Kansas Wesleyan, who put up some great numbers against Heston, 6 touchdowns against them. And then finally here, as we kind of reach the end, you have Ani Morales of Hope, specifically her game against St. Thomas, where they won in 6 overtime, 264 yards, 6 touchdowns, 46 rushing yards, and a rushing touchdown in that crazy upset win. And then a whole bunch of other players. I could go on and on and on here, but really there could only be one Playmaker of the Week, and it is a player that I have not mentioned yet, but I know played excellent in this game here. Unfortunately, I do not have her defensive stats as of right now, but I'll talk about them in a minute here. But I think your Playmaker of the Week for week 2 has to be Madison Powell out of Hope International versus St. Thomas in that 6 overtime game, specifically 5 receptions, 112 yards, and 2 receiving touchdowns, including, I believe, the game winner at the end. On top of that, like I said, I don't have her defensive stats, but make sure you go ahead and go back to episode 497 and listen to that recap. She came up with big stops in the fourth quarter where, basically St. Thomas had a chance to go into the red zone and essentially end the game. In regulation, Madison Powell got a big-time stop to give Hope a chance to go ahead and score the game-tying scores to tie the game. If Madison Powell never got that flagpole on fourth down, they wouldn't have had that drive to go ahead and do that. In addition, on that drive, she caught a massive 40-plus yarder to go ahead and put Hope in the red zone to set that score up. And then, like I said, in the end, made some massive flagpoles, made some massive catches that extended this game, and then eventually won the game for them with that catch at the end. A spectacular contested catch over the middle to win them the game, and it was great defense. It was just better offense by Madison Powell, and so this one was pretty close. Her quarterback Morales was very close as well, but we all felt like with the efforts of Madison Powell in this one on both sides of the ball, Hope probably wouldn't have been able to win this game. And I know she was dog-tired afterwards because she was starting both ways and just playing at an extremely high level, but she definitely impressed in this upset win over St. Thomas. And so there you go. Your week 2 Playmaker of the Week is Hope International's Madison Powell. Alrighty, now moving on, let's go to our fantasy points segment. Remember, basically how this works is that we have a fantasy point generator, and it's ESPN standard that we use. Shout out simulatedfootball.com for that, where we put in the stats from players that we find from all over the country in their performances from week 2, and we generate how many fantasy points they would score based off of those stats. And I'm not going to explain fantasy football like I did last time. I'm just going to assume that you know that the more stats they get, the more amount of points they get here as well. I will mention, though, if there are any turnovers that they commit that does go against their points, and that does actually affect our total points rankings this week here, which I'll talk about later. The only difference is that if a player was to score a passing touchdown, for some reason in ESPN standard, it's not 6 points, or at least in this simulated football points calculator, it is not 6 points. And so I just made it 6 points. So I put in the rest of the stats here and then just multiplied however passing touchdowns they had by 6, and we go from there. And so this is just a great way of seeing which players statistically were the best in the country. And this week was very dominated by the NAI team. So we have a lot of NAI squads here, at least compared to last week. And so let's go ahead and hop right into it now. I will say this. Let's start at number 10 here. And actually, we're going to start with the players who scored the most total fantasy points this week. And so players who played multiple games, this definitely is an advantage to them for sure here. I will mention that. But there are some players who played a single game that did make this list. Now, I will say originally, Anahi Morales of Hope International was at 10 on this list here because her performance against St. Thomas was so good, the single game performance, that, it put her up here. But unfortunately, she did play against Warner and Weber in games that did not quite go so well, and that ended up being the difference of like a single or so point here. And so unfortunately, she is just outside here, but I wanted to shout her out because she did have a great performance against St. Thomas. So make sure you check out that recap back in episode 497. Let's go ahead and start out number 10 for this week. Here in week 2, we have Shahiro Awada of Kansas Wesleyan, their quarterback, versus Heston. 251 passing yards, 6 touchdowns, 39 rushing yards, a rushing touchdown. I believe only had like 2 or 3 incompletions even, and no turnovers at all. But that was enough for 55.94 points. Yes, starting the bar high here. At 9, we have Deshae Branham of Life. The athlete kind of did it all. Also played in 3 games this week, but was pretty productive in all 3 games versus Florida Memorial. Passing yard for a passing touchdown, by the way. 20 rushing yards, 3 receptions, 70 yards, and 2 receiving touchdowns for 32. Versus St. Thomas, 4 passing yards, 4 rushing yards, a rushing touchdown, 9 receptions, and 63 yards for 21.86 points. And then against Kaiser, a little bit of a quieter game, but still some good production here. 37 passing yards, 6 rushing yards, 2 receptions, 7 yards for 4.78 points, for a total of 58.64 points here, which is good for 9th place. In 8th place, we have Jade Maziata of Lindsey Wilson University. Played 2 games here. In her first one against against Chowan, she went 2 receptions for 28 yards and 2 receiving touchdowns. That was good enough for 16.8 points. And then versus Virginia Wesleyan in her second game, 9 receptions, 95 yards, 4 receiving touchdowns. Also caught an interception, which does count towards points if you caught it, not throw it. And she had 44.5 points from that game for a grand total of 61.3 fantasy points. Your 7th leading scorer from this last week is Warner's very own quarterback, Katherine Hutchinson. Only played in 1 game here, but scored a lot of points at the quarterback position in this 1 game versus Hope. 331 passing yards, 9 passing touchdowns. Eventually, we're going to do a record book. I don't know if that's the most passing touchdowns in a game, but that has to be up there for sure. Anyways, good enough for 67.24 fantasy points in that one. No rushing yards or turnovers, which is pretty crazy considering all of that. Now, moving on here, up next is Ariana Christian of Thomas, who had 2 games versus Emmanuel, had 82 passing yards, 1 interception, -9 rushing yards, but had 3 receptions for 109 yards and 2 receiving touchdowns. Also caught an interception for 28.38 points. Versus Lisa McRae, she had herself a game though, 131 yards, 4 passing touchdowns, threw 2 interceptions, but still had 124 rushing yards and a rushing touchdown, and caught another interception, scoring 45.64 points there, for a grand total of 74.02 points here in week 2. Now, to go ahead and start our top 5 here, this is where things get interesting. We have Jaylee Santiago of Lindsey Wilson, their backup quarterback, and hopefully I'm saying her name right here, but even as the backup, she performed at a very high level, and I'll tell you what the first is once we get through this list, because she has another teammate, or 2 teammates on this list here coming up. But versus Virginia Wesleyan, 136 yards, 6 passing touchdowns, 41.44 points scored there. And then against Chowan, 207 yards, 5 touchdowns. Did throw a pick though, for 36.28 points in that one, for a grand total of 77.72 points. That is good enough for 5th in week 2 last week there. So there you go. Moving on, we have another quarterback, this time the starter for Kaiser. That is Ava Wallace in her opening week here, where she played great versus Lisa McRae, let's go the other way, versus Life, 319 yards, 5 passing touchdowns, 3 rushing yards, 1 reception for a yard for 44.16 points. And then versus Lisa McRae, 195 passing yards, 6 touchdowns, did throw a pick though, but had a reception for 9 yards for 35.8 points, for a grand total of 79.96 points here in her opening week. And I know Cody is feeling pretty good about that, having her on his fantasy team at the moment. In 3rd place is Cadence Wormers of Lindsey Wilson. I think the only receiver here in the top 5, one of the only receivers in this top 10 in general, in a week where quarterbacks lit it up. But she had herself a week here against Chowan, 9 receptions, 119 yards, 6 receiving touchdowns. Yes, you are hearing that correctly, for 56.9 fantasy points. Versus Virginia Wesleyan, 7 receptions, 74 yards, 2 receiving touchdowns for 26.40 fantasy points there for a total of 83.3 fantasy points last week in their 2 games. Now, in second place in week 2's total fantasy points, we have Kennedy Young, the quarterback of Huntington College, played 3 games and was very productive in all 3 here versus Campbellsville, 312 yards, 4 passing touchdowns, 2 interceptions, but also 28 rushing yards for 35.28 points versus LaGrange, 167 passing yards, 2 passing touchdowns, 15 rushing yards, and a rushing touchdown for 26.18 points. And then against Cumberland, 190 yards and 3 passing touchdowns. Did throw a pick, though, for 23.6 points for a grand total of 85.06 points for Kennedy Young of Huntington. And then in first place in total points this week was Amaya Pablo, the starting quarterback of Lindsey Wilson, who I believe breaks the record for most points scored in a week here. But against Chowan, 164 yards, 7 passing touchdowns, good enough for 48.56 points. No turnovers in that one. Same with this next one, no turnovers. But versus Virginia Wesleyan, 223 yards, 6 passing touchdowns, 46 rushing yards, 3 rushing touchdowns for 67.52 points here for a grand total of 116.08 points in week 2, where she turns it up. And for the first time ever, mind you, we have 2 quarterbacks in the top 5 of total points scored, and it's 2 quarterbacks from the same team. That's the first time ever, and that just shows how productive Lindsey Wilson was this last weekend. So there you go there. Once again, your top 10 in fantasy points goes like this from week 2. Shahiro Wada of Kansas Wesleyan at 10. At 9, Deshae Branham of Life. At 8, Jade Mazziata of Lindsey Wilson. 7, Catherine Hutchinson of Warner. 6, Ariana Christian of Thomas. 5, Jaylee Santiago of Lindsey Wilson. 4, Ava Wallace of Kaiser. 3, Cadence Warmers of Lindsey Wilson. 2, Kennedy Young of Huntington College. And at number 1 is Amaya Pablo of Lindsey Wilson. Now moving on, let's talk about our week 2 single game fantasy point leaders here. And it is a little bit different. It always is a little bit different from your total point leaders here. But let's go ahead and go into this. At 10 is Jade Mazziata of Lindsey Wilson, specifically versus Virginia Wesleyan, where she had 9 receptions, 95 yards, 4 receiving touchdowns, also caught an interception for 44.5 fantasy points. At number 9, we have Luz Ariana Herrera of Weber, their quarterback, versus Hope, 353 passing yards, 6 passing touchdowns, 5 rushing yards for 44.62 points. At 8, we have Ariana Christian of Thomas, specifically versus Elise McGray, 131 yards, 4 passing touchdowns. Did throw 2 picks, though, but had 124 rushing yards, a rushing touchdown, and also caught an interception to offset the one of the two that she threw. And so she had 45.64 points there. At 7, we have Amaya Pablo of Lindsey Wilson, specifically against Chowan, where she had 164 yards and 7 passing touchdowns for 48.56 points. At number 6, we have Kariah Williams of Point versus Reinhardt, 338 passing yards, 6 touchdowns. Did throw 4 picks in that game, mostly at the end, but also had 59 rushing yards and a rushing touchdown. Still pretty good for 55.42 points. At 5 here to start our top 5 is Shahira Awada of Kansas Wesleyan against Heston, 251 passing yards, 6 passing touchdowns, 39 rushing yards, and a rushing touchdown for 55.94 points. At number 4 was Cadence Warmers of Lindsey Wilson versus Chowan here. 9 receptions, 119 receiving yards, 6 receiving touchdowns for 56.9 points. At 3, we have Anahe Morales of Hope versus St. Thomas. She had 264 passing yards, 6 passing touchdowns. Sorry, Hope International. 264 passing yards, 6 passing touchdowns, 46 rushing yards, and a rushing touchdown for 56.26 points. At 2, we have Catherine Hutchinson of Warner, 67.24 fantasy points on 331 passing yards and 9 passing touchdowns. And then finally, we have Amaya Pablo of Lindsey Wilson versus Virginia Wesleyan, 223 passing yards, 6 passing touchdowns, 46 rushing yards, and 3 rushing touchdowns for a grand total of 67 52 points in that game. Very close with Catherine Hutchinson in that one here. But a very productive week, really, by quarterbacks in week 2 here. Which actually, you could probably expect that most weeks, but this week specifically, they were lighting it up. The offense was going to start the season for a lot of these teams. So there you go there. That is your top 10. Once more, top 10 in points per game in week 2. Jade Maziano of Lindsey Wilson, Luzariana Herrera, of Weber, Ariana Christian of Thomas, Maya Pablo of Lindsey Wilson versus Chowan. At 6 is Kariah Williams of Point. At 5 is Shihiro Wada of Kansas Wesleyan. 4 is Cadence Warmers of Lindsey Wilson versus Chowan. At 3 was Anae Morales of Hope. At 2 was Catherine Hutchinson of Warner. And then at 1 is Maya Pablo of Lindsey Wilson versus Virginia Wesleyan. All right, now I gotta give an update on the PMC Fantasy Football League. In case you are unaware, basically myself, Cody, and Gino have drafted a team of players that we have started week by week here, and based on how well they do and the stats we are able to get, that's how many fantasy points that each player gets, and then that each team gets by totaling all of that up. And so we do this, it's friendly competition, just to see, hey, who do we think is going to be the biggest producer each week, and just for bragging rights at the end of the season. And so if you remember, in week 1, I was the only responsible one. I got my team right, and we got our week 1 dub here. In week 2, a lot more teams played here, but we did pass some different rules in this league, so now we have expanded our team to 15. Before, I think we only had like 8 or 9 different players, including defenses, but we have went ahead and expanded to 15. That way we could stash a couple more players, and then this way we'll probably also drop more players. And then this was also our first week of waiver wire, and so basically we just did it in reverse order. Whoever scored the lowest or did not do the best would go ahead and have first pick, and then so on and so on. And so let's go ahead and go over all of that. Or actually, no, let's not go over the pickups and drops just yet, because none of us really picked anybody up or dropped anybody. Well, nobody dropped anybody, not yet. But none of us picked anybody up before they played their games, so those points don't count. So let's talk about how this week went real quick here, and we're going to go in order from the most points scored by the team with the most points scored to the team with the least points scored. And so the winner from this week was Cody here. His starting lineup was Ava Wallace, Catherine Hutchinson, Aaliyah Wood, Ashley Clam. Liz Linkus was in there. You didn't replace her with anybody. And then you also had Brenda Ramirez, Omariah Gordon, and Warner. And in total, his team scored 233.4 points, 79.96 from Ava Wallace, another 67.24 from Catherine Hutchinson, all in one game, by the way, from Hutchinson. From Aaliyah Wood, 21.7, from Ashley Clam, 40.7. Interesting enough, Brenda Ramirez did not play this week, or at least did not record a stat this week here, so 0 points from Brenda Ramirez. Did get 14.8 from Omariah Gordon in her one game, and then against Warner, their defense scored 9 points, but I'm not going to lie, my defense also scored 9 points, but they didn't have as many turnovers, so I might need to look into that scoring system again, by the way. But anyways, 233.4 points, as Cody's team is the week 1 winner. Week 2 winner. Now, runner-up is my squad. Unfortunately, I did have one less player play than Cody, so I had 2 open spots here, and only 1 quarterback who played, which is a little bit of a disadvantage, but I probably could have picked somebody up before then. It is what it is there here. But basically, my team scored a total of 180.2 points. Shihiro Wada scored 55.94 for me. Then I had Tara Lorente in there who didn't play. Then I had Crystal Quinn scored kind of a low, I don't know. I thought she could have maybe scored more, or Milligan in general scored more, but only 8.4 fantasy points in their game against Bruden Parker here. Riley Bolser also got in there, but still, pretty productive, but a lot of players got to eat in that game. She had 6.8 points, which is not bad coming off an injury, mind you, her first game coming off an injury, so can live with that. Destiny Lockett, 41.42 points, being a big-time contributor. Deshae Branham had a good week for me me as well. 58 points, 64 points. And then Kaiser's defense scored 9 points. I ain't gonna lie, they had multiple turnovers, because now that I'm looking at this, that is 9 points through 2 games. I definitely maybe have to check the math on the defensive stats here. Either way, I mean, it doesn't matter. If they scored 3 more points, I still would have lost. Even honestly, if I scored 20 more points with that defense, I still would have lost. For a total for 180.2 points. Not bad. You know, it's going to be interesting to see how some of these players perform moving forward. But did pick up some players, and we'll talk about that later here. And then Gino, his team, unfortunately, last place, losing to my team by almost 60. And Gino had the least amount of players play this week here. I believe he had 3 open spots. 2 open spots and a defense. This is what his team looked like for those who did play. Anna Vincenzini, Bridget Kaiser, Jessica Finley, Caitlin Sigmundy, Janasia Wilson here. Unfortunately for Gino, Janasia Wilson did not play, or did not seem like she played in any of the 2 games last week, so that's interesting. Caitlin Sigmundy, though, in 1 game, 35 points, probably maybe her most productive game of her career. That could be wrong, though, but definitely super productive to start her senior season. Jessica Finley to start her season, 42.2 points. She was balling in that one. And actually, now that I'm going to go ahead and look, I believe she scored the most points as a receiver out of anybody this week. And yes, that is true. So there you go there. But then Bridget Kaiser, only 18.16 points. Anna Vincenzini added on 21.1 points, which is pretty respectable there as well. Unfortunately, for only 116.46 points, this week will be a better week for Gino, as he does have a couple Ottawa players, and so them playing this week and a couple games this week as well will definitely help boost his numbers. All right, now let's go ahead and talk about some waiver wire pickups that were made as of today, February 25th. Let's go ahead and start with Gino's team. He will go ahead and pick up Avalon Lux Offerman, the wide receiver from Warner. I think that was an obvious pickup for him. Also, you know, hometown hero, right, down here in Colorado, or up here in Colorado, I guess we should say. And so he will go ahead and pick up Avalon there. And then in addition, he will actually go ahead and add Hope International's quarterback, Ani Morales, who had a great game versus St. Thomas. That way he has another quarterback to roll with. Looking at my team, I made some moves as well, in an effort to diversify the team a little bit, and so that I could also fill out all my spots this week as well here. But I've added 3 players. I've added Alex Odom, wide receiver DB from Campbellsville, who had a great week to start the season here. I actually predicted her to low-key have a breakout season, her and Corinne Talkington, and it looks pretty good so far. And so I definitely could have used her last week, but we'll be picking her up from Campbellsville. I also picked up Tramisha Harris, wide receiver DB from Kaiser. Kind of surprised that nobody picked her up before I did, since I was last in the waiver wire pickups. But, you know, Tramisha Harris, she put up some big numbers for Kaiser. It looks like she is their number 1 wide receiver, at least statistically, right now. There is probably a good chance that changes as teams adjust and whatnot, but also Kaiser just has a lot of weapons over there, and I'm pretty high on Tramisha Harris. I thought she was great at Florida Gateway, so excited about this one. And then I was also able to sneak in this pull as well. This pickup, I got a Maya Pablo, quarterback from Lindsey Wilson, who had some record-breaking performances last week here. Excited to start her this week. I think she has 2 games this week too. So really excited just to see how Lindsey Wilson does and how my new quarterback, Maya Pablo, does for the squad this week. And then last but not least, we have Cody. Cody only picked up 1 player, very confident in the team he has right now, in Lydiana Da Silva from Da Silva from Daytona State, the wide receiver DB. Another very productive week from her in week 2, so that's back-to-back big-time weeks, and she will be joining Cody's team, who already does have a pretty stacked wide receiving core here. So very interested into seeing what happens this week. As of right now, I have a win, Cody has a win, Gino does not have a win yet, but that could change this week, and so excited to see what our teams and players do going into week 3. All right, now let's go ahead and talk about our rankings here. These week 2 rankings are updated as of the beginning of this week, February 23rd, Monday here. That's when we got all of our votes in. So any other games that happened after that were not included in these week 2 rankings. So let's go ahead and talk about, just real quick, about the process here. So myself and the other voters here, we all rank teams 1 through 25. If a team is ranked at 1, then they get 25 points. 2, 24, 3, 23, and so on and so on. I basically then add up all the points, and then that's how we average it out. The team with the most points is closest to the top. And so all of us vote a little bit differently, right? Some of us have other teams in higher esteem than others, and that's okay. That's why we average it out. That way we can get a good difference of opinions. And in addition, if there are any reasons or things that our voters wanted us to mention or wanted me to mention, I will make sure to go ahead and talk about that when we go through our own rankings, the PMC rankings, which is the average part of all of this. But some of them may be referring to teams a little bit higher than lower than other people have teams. So just keep that in mind. Now, let's go ahead and go to last week here. After week 1, here were the rankings. Just out was Irvine Valley, Barton College, Southwestern, Florida Memorial, Saddleback, Mount St. Mary's, La Sierra, Gallaudet, Benedictine Mesa, Eastern, Arizona Christian, and Mars Hill. Then our actual rankings went tied at 24, Cumberland and Ferrum, 23, Marymount, 22, St. Francis, 21, King, 20, Lisa McRae, 19, Lindsey Wilson, 18 was Graceland, tied at 16 was Daytona State and William Woods, 15, Siena Heights, 14, Life, 13, Campbellsville, 12, Midland, 11, Wingate, and then tied at 9 was Thomas and Weber, 8, Kansas Wesleyan, 7, St. Thomas, 6, Milligan, 5, Florida Gateway, 4, Baker, 3, Warder, 2, Kaiser, who did get a first place vote, and then at number 1 was Ottawa. Now going into this next week's rankings here, we had a lot of changes. In fact, every team except for 6 in that 25 that I just mentioned either moved up or down. So let's go ahead and start with the honorable mentions here. I'm just going to name them off from the teams that had the most points to the least here. Southwestern, Ferrum, Florida Memorial, Reinhardt Point, Mount St. Mary's, Alabama State, Arizona Christian, Hope International, Emmanuel, Huntington College, and Eastern. Now, I'm going to go ahead and mention just some notes, comments that our voters had to say about each one. One of our voters, shout out womenscollegeflagfootball.com. Make sure you check them out at their website and on social media at Women's College Flag Football. But they had a couple honorable mentions here. Ferrum, they said, and they weren't the only one to vote for Ferrum and some of these other teams, by the way. They're just the only one to write notes for them. But they said, after winning the NCFFL championship, we are ready to see what that means for them this season. As far as Alabama State goes, that's another honorable mention. They said they have a loss, but it was a 2-0 defensive struggle against a great Texas Southern team. About Point, this is what they had to say: bounce back from a tough Daytona State loss with a massive 66-0 shutout win. With Emmanuel, they said proven they can win ugly games with tough mid-zone coverage. Eastern, reason to think the Eagles will be better than last year's 14-4 record. Barden, he had this to say: coaches are high on the Bulldogs' talent and ready for the season opener. As far as King goes, has thought to be contenders in the Conference Carolinas, ready to see them play. Gallaudet, this team did not lose last season, though many Marymount starters were out of the game. And then ELAC, East Los Angeles Community College, here said resilient Queens who have survived a tough February schedule. So there you go. Just a couple honorable mentions there as well. And I wanted to mention two that I had in my honorable mentions, or that made the honorable mentions, but I had them ranked, was Hope International and Huntington College. Hope International, they won a gritty game, gritty versus St. Thomas here. Yes, they got blown out by some contenders, but they were top three teams in the country. I kind of expect that. For me personally, I went ahead and ranked Hope at 23, and I feel like that makes sense considering they played 2 and 3 in the country, and they lost big to them, but they did beat a top 10 team, and I think that merits having them be in our top 25, or at least in my top 25. And then last but not least, Huntington College, they're my 25th team, just finished just outside here. Currently they only have one loss on the season. They have a number of wins, including a big blowout win over Cumberland, which does say a loss, or does say a lot. And then their one loss was against Campbellsville, a 2-point game that they definitely could have won here. So look out for Huntington College, but they are ranked at 25 for me, just outside. Now, let's go ahead and get into our top 25 here. And as I go, I will say the comments and notes that I was given from our voters. But at 25, we have Saddleback College out of California. Cody had this to say. He said a 7-0 start is good across any metric, and excited to see if they could maintain this. Our friends at Women's College Flag Football said this team showed real heart, winning 8-7 to take the Bobcat Bowl tournament crown here. And then I also believe, if I'm not mistaken, Gino also ranked Saddleback, but did not have any comments to say about them at this moment. So there you go there. But Saddleback making our top 25 for the first time here after being an honorable mention, cracking it at 25. Now at 24 though is Lise McRae. Lise McRae does move down 4 spots. By the way, Saddleback moved up 5 spots. Previously, if we did all the rankings, right, all the way up to whoever got votes, Saddleback was at 30. They now are at 25. Lise McRae, though, they moved down 4 spots to 24 after a tough weekend with a lot of losses against some really good Sun Conference teams. Cody had this to say: not what they were hoping for, but this tough schedule will build them up strong for other games this season. And honestly, I agree. They played North Carolina Central College, and, they're not the best club team, right? And so I think for them to go ahead and get tested here against some really good teams like a Florida Gateway, a Kaiser, that's what you need to see how much more you need to improve here. And they're going to take that with them as they go ahead and play their conference schedule here later. And so, a tough go, but still holding on to that top 25 spot for now here at 24. Now at 23 is King, who does move down a couple spots. They have not played yet here, but there were some other teams that moved up, which is why they've moved down. At 22 is Marymount, who does move up slightly. They have not played yet, but I think with other teams losing and whatnot, they definitely move up as well here. At 21, though, is St. Francis, who does move up a spot. Despite losing in a overtime game against Siena Heights, I think the big thing about that game was that St. Francis, they brought an established NAIA program to 2 overtimes, and it's a Siena Heights team that, was improved compared to last season. And so for St. Francis to really hang in there with them, I could see why some of our voters might have moved them up a little bit. For me, I think I kept them at the same spot here, but it makes sense. They did not lose big in their first game like some of these other first-year programs. Now at 20 is Irvine Valley, who cracks our top 25 for the first time, moving up 6 spots here to make our top 25 right here at 20. Cody had this to say: undefeated, so sliding them up a couple of spots. Then Women's College Flag Football said Kayla Chappell is dealing shutout wins, have the Lasers looking like the best in the West. And I would have to agree, at least out in California, Irvine Valley looks pretty good here. I think the only thing preventing them from moving up, though, is the quality of teams and opponents that they have on their schedule at the moment. So we'll see how high they could climb, but undefeated for now is undefeated. Now at 19 is Graceland, who does move down a spot, but it's because other teams have moved up. Same with these next couple of teams. At 18 is William Woods. They moved down a spot. Actually, 2 spots here. Our friends at Women's College Flag Football said look strong at the NAI Finals last season. Ready to see how they fit in this year. So there you go. At 17 is Life, who does drop 3 spots here. One of those spots was definitely because the team is rising, but this is what Gino had to say about them. He said, and he had them a lot lower, he said, I'm keeping them at 25 for now, but the Soaring Eagles not being able to beat St. Thomas while they are at their absolute worst is not what I'm wanting to see from this squad. They need to get over the hump sooner or later, or they just won't be a top 25 team for much longer. And, I understand that. Life, they need to beat some top 25 teams here. They beat Florida Memorial by 4 scores, which, according to my preview, that's a little bit more than I thought they would. But unfortunately, they missed an opportunity to go ahead and take out a St. Thomas team who was reeling from the night before, and they did it. And so because of that, they do move down a couple spots, as other teams have had more dominant weeks, or has had a more dominant week than them. Now at 16 is Siena Heights, who does move down slightly in our rankings, just by 1 here, and it's because of teams moving up ahead of them. But, this is what Women's College Flag Football.com had to say about them. Said, massive mental toughness with a double overtime win over St. Francis, and they love that. And I have to agree. Now here's the thing, St. Francis is a first-year program, so maybe not the cleanest win, the most dominant win you could get in week 1, but it's a good win to start here. And on top of that, it looked like their offense was really rolling in this game, and it kind of felt like, compared to last year where the offense at times sputtered, I thought it was definitely improvement. So there you go. Now at 15 is Midland, who has not played yet, but they do move down a couple of spots as other teams who have played has stayed ahead of them. And we're going to talk about those teams who have played here because they're ranked right here. At 14 is Daytona State, who moves up 2 spots here. This is what Cody had to say after seeing them beat Lisa McRae amongst other drops. I think this is a fair point to catapult the squad above other teams who have not played yet. Gino had this to say, what a great win against a super tough Lisa McRae defense. They kept that offense in check all game, too, with a nice defensive performance of their own. And then Women's College Flag Football said this, their second season leap is real. A massive 87-0 win over Andrew showed just how high their ceiling is, which I gotta agree with. At the moment, I believe Daytona State is undefeated, and they've beat some tough teams, and they look pretty good here through 2 weeks. We'll see how that holds up moving forward, though. At 13, though, is Lindsey Wilson, who moves up a massive amount of spots, the most we've seen out of any team so far this year. But they go ahead and make a 6-place jump here, moving up 6 spots here. And I'm just going to say, I said this in their preview. This first-year team is going to be good. You cannot go wrong with a successful coach from Florida, as well as a record-breaking quarterback that he coached from Florida as well. That's all I'm saying, but let's go ahead and see what everyone else had to say, and then I have some other things I want to mention on them. This is what Cody said. Setting records for biggest margin of victory is quite a way to mark your arrival, and has earned a spot in my top 10 already, in Cody's top 10, not ours yet. He said, we have seen them prove the talent early, and I'm excited to see how they continue to compete and potentially clobber others. Gino had this to say, this is a big jump, but you can't argue with the dominance and confidence this team has so far. And then our friends at Women's College Flag Football said the blowout opening weekend got everyone's attention. Now, I'm just going to put it out there. Again, I did say you can't go wrong with a good head coach and a great quarterback who's been with each other for a while. And if there's one thing for certain, this offense was popping off. And even then, they had their backups in, and they were super productive. That shows you how deep this team is. On top of that, their defense played well too. I got to watch through both games, and I thought they were extremely dominant and gave their offense a lot of chances to score. You cannot score a lot without getting the ball back quickly. Now, does 2 games make a program? No, it does not, especially against 2 first-year programs in Chowan and Virginia Wesleyan. It does say, though, that there are levels to this, but we will see how they go moving forward. They're going to play some teams, including the team that's right ahead of them here soon, and we'll just see how far up they are. But so far, they look really good. The film looks really good to me, and I mean, it's nothing that I did not expect, if I'm being fairly honest here. And if I'm going to make another prediction, I'm just going to go ahead and say it. Don't be surprised if Lindsey Wilson claims a top 10 spot here very soon here. Now at 12 is Campbellsville here, moving up a spot compared to last week after a very successful opening weekend. Cody had this to say: I'll keep them here just because they locked in and also had a big win in their opening week. And then women's college flag football said strong start, gritty comeback over a strong Huntington team. And I have to agree, I think Huntington is better than what other people give them credit for, so there's that as well. So losing or winning against them by a score isn't the worst, but it does hold them back a little bit from rising a little bit farther here. This Campbellsville team, to me, looked pretty good here. Talkington to Odom looks like it's going to be the connection this season. Defensively, Amani Scott has really stepped up in the place of J.C. Harper. I like where this Campbellsville team is. We'll see how they continue to perform against other teams that are ranked inside the top 25, though, at least officially. So we'll see. Now, at 11 is St. Thomas, who does suffer the biggest drop. We had the biggest jump in Lindsey Wilson. St. Thomas suffers the biggest drop in our rankings this year so far. And on top of that, for the first time ever in PMC history, St. Thomas is not ranked in our top 8. So that is definitely saying something, as they have fallen down to 11, just outside the top 10. Everyone had something to say, so let's go ahead and talk about it. Cody said this program could be in trouble. This might be a steep drop, but after seeing what other Sun Conference teams did to Hope, and then witnessing St. Thomas struggle over the past week in general, this team could be in too deep really quick. Gino had this to say: new coach adjustment, sure, but this just simply is not a 15 team right now. We will see what happens, as he had them drop way below 15. Women's college flag football had this to say: Cardiac Queens dinged for the high points against, though. And I gotta agree, look, I did the preview, and, I also watched the game. I'm just gonna be honest, I think there's a reason why they have not posted a box score or the live stream on demand. This is an embarrassing loss for St. Thomas. That's what it is. It's embarrassing to lose to a team in Hope, who's a first-year program as well, who just came off of 2 massive losses, being outscored nearly 100-0, and then it takes St. Thomas 6 overtimes just to lose to them. It's not a good look. And then the next day they go ahead and play Life, and they have to go to overtime again with a Life team who currently in our rankings is sitting right here at 17. And it just does not look good, for St. Thomas. And then offensively, they didn't look better in that second game either. Still threw 4 interceptions. They're going back and forth between Cruz, between Newton, and in a good conference, especially the Sun Conference, I do not know if that is sustainable. And there's another Sun Conference team which we're going to talk about here in a minute, but that has a similar situation. But they've won their games. St. Thomas, they're 1-1 right now. Now, I did say in their preview, or not in the preview, sorry, in the recap, I did say in the recap that they could either go up from here, learn from this experience, or this could mark, a tougher season than what they are usually used to. Like I said, first time ever. And we've been covering this thing since 2022, but first time ever they're not ranked in our top 10. Usually they're sitting in that top 7, actually. And so this is kind of a historical drop for them right now. But, for them to move back up, they got to win games against ranked teams and maybe even do it a little bit more convincingly, as well, as it has been a shaky start to the season. And so will St. Thomas be able to get back to form? Only time will tell, but they do look like a young team with some good talent. Sometimes it just takes that young team a little bit more time, though. So I don't know. We'll see, but for now, they drop. Now, into the top 10, we have a brand new face, and it is Wingate. They have not played yet. This is what Women's College Flag Football has to say about them. Still think this is the team to beat in Conference Carolinas, and I also have to agree. Now, Wingate is going to face a gauntlet of a schedule to start not only their program, but their season here. They go ahead and start this week and their program history by playing Kaiser and Ottawa. I originally said they would play them last week. I was mistaken. They actually play this weekend in Reinhardt. I also believe they play Reinhardt as well. It's not easy, right? But I will say this. If they could keep it close, or if they could beat one of those teams for some reason, that could really shake things up. And so that is the matchup to watch this week here. And it's a talented team for sure here. Now, at 9 is Weber. This is what we had to say about them. And actually, Weber is in the same spot. They were at 9 last week. But this is what we had to say about them. Cody said this team smacked hope around to start the season, which could show they're going to be more at play in the sun this year than last season. Gino said this: Weber has a very serious shot at being a top 3 team in the Sun Conference for the first time in a few years. And then Women's College Flag Football said good case should be right behind Warner based on games played. And look, I agree. I feel like they are very underrated right now. The performance of the quarterback, Ariana Herrera, that's definitely a plus. Hope isn't a bad team. They got blasted by the top teams in the country, but that's going to happen by most teams, right? And so for Weber to similarly dominate a team like Hope, that's still pretty good here. And then offensively, it looked like it was just flowing for them, which was the big thing. Who would be the quarterback after Sam Wilson, and how productive would they be? This obviously shows that she has a very high ceiling at the very least here. And the receiving group is the receiving group. They're talented. Cheyenne Duran, Balako had 2, I believe. Caitlin Sigmundy had a hat trick in her first game, right? And then you also still have Riley Bolser, who is back, who's working back into things. Might be maybe a slow, kind of rollout for her. We'll see, or slower, but there is a lot of talent on this squad offensively. And then defensively, another year under their belt, they look like a experienced and seasoned defensive group. So right now they're sitting at 9, but in my opinion, there is a good shot that they could shoot up here pretty soon. Now at 8 is Thomas here. Thomas moves up a spot for now. This is what Cody had to say. This squad is still undefeated and still have shown more of a return to normalcy after shaking off what I think was rust. Gino had this to say: don't love the offensive scheme, but they have some great athletes to compete against just about anybody. Women's College Flag Football had this to say: losing a head coach doesn't matter. Watch for the Nighthawks to climb here. And I agree. I mean, they looked a lot more confident this week with big wins over Emmanuel. And then I believe they went ahead and they beat Lisa McRae by a whole bunch as well. Now, in the Emmanuel game, the defense really showed out. They looked pretty good here. In the Lisa McRae game, it looks like Ariana Christian has maybe taken over, at least in that game, taken over at quarterback here. You also had Sabrina Schlegelmilch and Amiri Logan make their season debuts. And, the offense was flowing, right? We know what the defense is going to do. They're talented, but offensively, for them to be a top 10 team, they got to be able to score consistently. That is what they did. And for now, they hold this spot at 8. They could see a climb if they beat teams ahead of them. Now, at 7, though, is Milligan, who does move down a spot. They would go ahead and beat Bruden Parker Christian, but it wasn't without some struggles here. This is what Cody had to say. Will not drop them, but kind of expected a little bit more. Gino had this to say: not the cleanest offensive performance, but we are seeing that Lily Rumrow and Parker Bridges might end up being even more impactful than I predicted them to be in the Milligan preview episode. Women's College Flag Football had this to say: a solid win over Bruden Parker keeps them in the top 10. And I kind of got to agree with all that. First off, defensively, they look good. They should shut out a team like Bruden Parker Christian, who's a first-year program. They look dominant. Offensively, 2 touchdowns, 2 interceptions is not ideal for Bridget Kaiser. On top of that, this team got shut out in the second half. And that's never a good thing, especially against a first-year program. You know what that kind of tells me is that, hey, the first-year program, they got over the shock of it early on in the first half. In the second half, they got back to form. And I don't know if getting shut out by Bruden Parker in the second half is necessarily a good thing. They also only scored 2 touchdowns offensively. Had a couple pick sixes, so that does help inflate their 20-plus point win over Bruden Parker Christian quite a bit. So look out at Milligan here. Maybe it's a little bit of a rusty start to the season. They do bring back pretty much everyone except for Sarah Rancorn, which does mess a little bit with what you want to do, but you've had an off season to kind of figure it out. You also got back Abilene Laprice as well to help replace her. We'll see what happens with Milligan. For now, I mean, they're undefeated, so they stay right here at 7, but definitely looking for a stronger performance here. Now, at 6 is Kansas Wesleyan, who moves up 2 spots here, played in their first game, and they dominated Heston, obviously not showing any rest here. This is what Cody had to say. Going to leap them up following a dominant display to start the season. Gino had this to say. Awada's MVP campaign is off to a roaring start. We are also seeing some freshmen make an impact just like they did early last season. And then women's college flag football said answered head coach questions in a 73-point win over Heston. Look, I did not expect them to ever lose to Heston. I thought maybe it might look, if anything, similar to how Milligan beat Bruden Parker, only by like 3, maybe 4 scores. But Kansas Wesleyan, they looked really sharp. I did not watch the whole game because there's no need to, but I watched the whole first half, and Shahira Awada looks like the best quarterback in the country. And there's some great quarterback performances this season, but she looked extremely sharp as one of the veterans and most decorated quarterbacks in all of women's college flag football. That was to be expected. Maybe some, learning curves here and there, but she looked really good, and so did this offense. Shout out to Leah Wood, Jasmine Whitfield, Nija Green, all of those players, Aaliyah Young over there. They were rolling up and down on Heston with ease. And you love to see that. And that's good, right? I think with the head coach, there's some questions of like, hey, maybe this offense might not be the same, right? You also lose some other players, but they looked pretty good. Shania Marape also came back and had a good showing after missing all of last season, so that's great. The defense looked pretty good. Once again, shout out Jocelyn Huntsman with her first interception, almost pick 6 of her career. Coached by Alexa Mansour, the longtime K-Dub linebacker for them, now defensive coordinator and coach for them, I believe. They looked good. They were flying. They're aggressive. Now, can they do this against ranked comp? We will see, but it's a good start to the season for now as they go ahead and jump Milligan. Now, at 5 is Florida Gateway, and actually our whole top 5 is the same here, but let's go ahead and talk about it anyways. At 5, Florida Gateway, Cody said this: comparing scores and dropping for winning is not usually my style, but this win over Lise McRae did not feel like the win of the 4th best team in the country quite yet. Gino had this to say about Florida Gateway: Lise McRae's defense is nasty, but that was almost a bad loss for the Timberwolves. That game against Ottawa on Thursday is going to be must-watch, though, between Florida Gateway and them. And then Women's College Flag Football said the Timberwolves stayed dangerous wins against Bruden Parker and Lise McRae. And yeah, I mean, look, wins are wins. I did watch a bit of that Lise McRae and Florida Gateway game, and to me, it just seemed like Florida Gateway could not finish drives. And they just couldn't put away Lise McRae. Lise McRae had a drive in the last couple minutes of the game to potentially win it, right? That's how close this game was. And nobody else really had that much trouble with them, which is interesting. And so I'm really not as concerned defensively as I am offensively. Offensively, I know they were playing a couple different quarterbacks, and even that, they just couldn't get too much production in this game. So for now, they're undefeated, but that's definitely something to keep an eye on moving forward if they're going to be a top team in the country. Now, at 4 is Baker. They have not played yet. do have notes about them, though. Cody said this, just got here via fall in his rankings, and said, I'm still excited to see what they will do. Women's college flag football is also ready to see Baker hit the field, and I am as well. I think this is going to be a very exciting team to watch. Now, at 3 is Warner. Still, Gino had this to say, there's no holes on this roster. They are banging on the door for the number 1 spot. Women's college flag football said 66-0 dismantling of Hope International proved that Coach Mims' squad hasn't lost a step. And I agree, I did not expect them to miss a step. They were pretty much returning everyone. In fact, with the addition of Mariah Gordon, as well as Avalon Lux-Offerman, shout out Avalon, who not only got her first career touchdowns, but got her first career hat trick in this one against Hope. They looked dominant. I gotta also praise Catherine Hutchinson. She looked really, really sharp. As far as experienced quarterbacks in the country go, her and Shiro Awada looked the best here in their opening game so far, and that's definitely something to be scared about because this Warner roster is loaded with talent. It feels like every receiver on this roster could be a number 1 somewhere else. That's the feeling. And then defensively, I also love the intensity they played with. Now, they're going to get their shot at Kaiser here soon. And I don't know if they're going to play Ottawa or not. I forgot. But they're going to get their shot at the top here. Like Gino said, do not be surprised if they're number 1 here sooner than later. But they got to continue to win games to do that. At 2 is Kaiser. Like I said, same as last time. Gino had this to say, Ava Wallace is just as good as everyone thought she was going to be, and that's a problem for the rest of the NAIA. Women's college flag football said they look like a threat again, convincing wins over Lise McRae and Life. And yeah, Kaiser has also not lost a step here, despite replacing a lot of players. On top of that, I don't believe Brennan Ramirez or Janasia Wilson has played for them this season. Kaiser has had 2 big-time blowout wins. Ava Wallace has been lights out, probably one of the top freshman quarterbacks in the country. Her and Amaya Pablo are battling for it neck and neck over there at Lindsey Wilson, so we'll see how that goes. But Ava Wallace is playing great football. Tramisha Harris, arguably the top receiver in the entire league, she is also playing very good right now. And just adding on to the embarrassment of riches they have, like an Ashley Clam, Caprio, Villarreal, they're all playing at a very high level right now, and once again, another team that could potentially claim the number 1 spot sooner than later, and they got a big one this week, I believe, against Ottawa, so that'll be exciting. At number 1 still is Ottawa. Women's college flag football says this, still the champs. Others are stacking impressive numbers, but they are still the champs, and I think that really speaks for all of us. Right now, they're still the champions. There's no reason to drop them. They have their opening games this week, and it is against some top talent, top 10 talent to start the season. We're going to really see where this Ottawa team is early on, so excited for that. Now, once again, our Week 2 rankings go just like this. Just out is Southwestern, Ferrum, FMU, Reinhardt, Point, Mount St. Mary's, Alabama State, Arizona Christian, Hope International, Emmanuel, and Huntington College. At 25 is Saddleback, 24 Lise McRae, 23 King, 22 Marymount, 21 St. Francis, 20 Irvine Valley, 19 Graceland, 18 William Woods, 17 Life, 16 Siena Heights, 15 Midland, 14 Daytona State, 13 Lindsey Wilson, 12 Campbellsville, 11 St. Thomas. At 10 is Wingate, number 9 Weber, 8 Thomas, 7 Milligan, 6 Kansas Wesleyan, 5 Florida Gateway, 4 Baker, 3 Warner, 2 Kaiser, and at number 1 still for now is Ottawa. Alrighty, that'll wrap up this episode of the Playmakers Corner podcast. Make sure you go ahead and check out episode 497, our previous one, with our recap if you haven't yet. But we're going to be dropping these episodes like this Tuesdays and Thursdays. And make sure you check out our social media at Playmakers Corner, as well as our website at playmakerscorner.com for all the updates from these new drops here moving forward and going into the future. So super excited for what's ahead. We got a big week 3 here. I feel like week 2 was pretty big, but week 3, we're looking at some fireworks here as we do welcome back the defending NAI national champions who will be beginning this week. So really excited to see that. Really excited for some good flag football. And once again, thank you so much for rocking with us. We will catch you later.